Today's guest is Robb Wolf, who I don't believe probably needs an introduction, but just for those of you out there who aren't really familiar with the paleo community, Robb Wolf is the guy. He's the author of The Paleo Solution and has really brought paleo, I think, mainstream over the last, I don't know, what's it been, 10 years or something that you've been doing this? 15? Okay. For the last 15 years.
Success.
Yes. So he is the man. So welcome, Robb. How are you?
Great. Huge honor to be here. Not super sleep deprived with the new baby, so I'm pretty stoked. When you first contacted me about this, I was thinking I could be a smoldering heap of burned out badness. So I'm doing not too bad.
Well, congratulations. And if you need to go running, if their baby's crying in the back or the house starts burning down, we'll pause for a minute and let you go handle that.
We're pretty good right now. I think we have a window of time where we can pull this off, so it should be good.
All right, awesome. So I know that you have a personal story regarding autoimmunity, and that kind of brought you into the paleo world. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Gosh, yeah, try not to make it too long, but my mother had been ill for years. Like when I was growing up, I remember she was maybe in her 30s and she had her gallbladder removed. She started getting things that now I recognize as kind of like peri-diabetic symptoms and also quite a complex of autoimmune symptoms. And she actually ended up in the hospital. Like the thing that pinned all this down as overt autoimmune disease was that she ended up in the hospital, and what was occurring was a rheumatoid arthritis flare that was actually attacking her heart and lungs, the lining of the pericardium and the lining of the lungs. Very nearly killed her. They put her on very high dose, immunosuppressant drugs, anti-inflammatory drugs, got the inflammation down. And then interestingly, her rheumatologist, through some kind of routine blood work, figured out that she was celiac and also found that she was likely reactive to grains in general, legumes, and dairy. And so I was talking with my mom on the phone about this, and at the time, I was eating a vegan diet, I was having a ton of health problems, all kinds of gut inflammation, had ulcerative colitis. Normally I walk around about 170, 175 pounds. I've been a state powerlifting champion, usually reasonably muscular, but at this time, I was about 135 or 140 pounds due to malabsorption issues. I was throwing food down the pie hole, but I wasn't absorbing anything. It was coming out largely unchanged. And so I'm talking to my mom. She said a lot of her problems were gut-related. She had a kind of a complex of autoimmune diseases, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's, like all these different things, and that her rheumatologist thought that it was related to grains, legumes, and dairy, which really got me thinking, as eating a vegan diet at the time, I was kind of like, okay, dairy, I'm not eating that, but grains and legumes.
It's all you're eating.
What else do you eat? And it was almost a flow of consciousness where I started thinking, well, grains, legumes, and dairy, when did people start eating that? And I was like, agriculture. And again, this is 15 years ago. The internet was nascent, and to the point with that, it was just kind of a flow of consciousness. And I was like, well, before agriculture, there was this thing called a paleo diet. And even back in 1997, 98, I had heard of something called a paleo diet. Went in, turned on my computer, waited for the dial-up to boot up, put into the newfangled search engine thing. I think at that time it was like web crawler or something, and there was this newfangled thing called Google. And into Google, I put paleo diet, and I found these two folks, Lauren Cordain and Art Devaney. Mm-hmm. And Lauren Cordain had a paper that had been published, or I don't even know if that paper was published yet, Cereal Grains Humanity's Double-Edged Sword. It might have been published at that point, but they both had some writings on the transition from a hunter-gatherer life way to a agrarian life way, and all kinds of inflammatory issues, particularly related to the gut, particularly related to autoimmunity. And so that was really where I found some information about this, and it caused me to change my diet and had a profound effect on my health. And really, that's where this whole thing started from.
Wow.
Much longer than what you were looking for.
No, that's great. And I mean, pretty progressive of your mother's doctor. I mean, even today, there are many people going to the rheumatologist, and they may not even be getting tested for celiac. And then to mention the grains and the dairy, I mean, that's really progressive.
It is, but here's a fascinating piece to this. So my mom lived in Redding, California. My wife, her family lived in Red Bluff, California. They're about 30, 40 miles apart. My wife's mother had diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis. Ended up dying about 3 years before I met Nikki. Back in her mother died in 2003 due to complications due to rheumatoid arthritis. Had the same rheumatologist, but this rheumatologist somehow found some blood work related to my mom that flagged something where he said, I think you've got intolerance to grains, legumes, and dairy. But then the rest of his practice, he didn't connect the dots with that.
Wow.
And so that's kind of the fascinating thing for me, and what is, so tragic, because just searching through the inbox of my email account, I probably had 600 or 700 testimonials of people who reversed, they had medically diagnosed rheumatoid arthritis. They started eating paleo, went autoimmune paleo. Their anti-nuclear antibodies went from very high to very low. Effectively they had rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, and now they don't. And so it's interesting, this rheumatologist found this problem with my mom, didn't find it with Nikki's mom, and Nikki's mom ended up dying as a consequence of the, not connecting the dots on that. So it's
But there's so many people out there suffering exactly like that. That their doctors, I had a patient in the other day, obviously I see a lot of patients with autoimmune disease, and basically the diet that I have is essentially a paleo diet for them as well. We call it the Myers Way. And this woman is, like, all of her symptoms are gone, but she's still on her meds. Now, before, she was on her meds and still had a lot of symptoms. Now we got the symptoms to go away, but she hasn't gotten off her meds. And I said, there's no requirement that you have to do that, but hopefully you'd like to start trying to wean from your meds now. All your labs are looking great. And she said, I'm just scared. Can you come with me to my rheumatologist's office? I mean, she'd come in from out of town. She knew I wasn't going to the rheumatologist's office, but just said, could you go with me? Because I just need you to help me convince him that it's okay. And because he tells me that, there's no way, I can't get off of it. It can't be reversed. And in fact, if I get off of these meds, I'm going to get a flare, and it's going to be 2 times as bad or 10 times as bad as it was. And then the medicines are not going to work, or I'll have to take twice as much meds. So it's this whole fear-based model. And I said, well, but that's because you're in this model that the doctor has no solution for you, right? I mean, what we did is we're finding the reasons that you got the autoimmunity in the first place, and we're removing those, and we're changing the diet, and we're fixing the gut, and we're doing all this stuff. So you're not just sitting there on your meds. Like, we've fixed the underlying cause. So I started making her feel more at ease, but that is what everybody hears. In fact, they hear the fear a lot of times. That's what I hear in my office, of like, if you do that, you're going against my will, and it's going to be dangerous, and you'll have to take more medicine, and things will be worse. And it's just this doom and gloom, fear-based.
Yeah, and autoimmunity is interesting because it will, even while, and you know this better than I do, even when folks are eating an inflammatory diet, people can cycle in and out of more severe symptoms, less severe symptoms. They can appear to be in remission. Maybe their stress level is lower. Maybe it's during the summer and they're outside getting some sun. Like, who knows what the factor is.
Right.
But then they can cycle back into kind of a flare stage. So for the rheumatologist, for the patient, it is, it's pretty well documented that folks can go through cyclic elements of like worse and less severe symptomology. So then it's kind of like, well, I changed my diet, I think that this is resolved, and then the rheumatologist, in a cover your ass kind of format, they're like, no, this could just be, a isolated event. You kind of get it on the one hand, but it's also, to the degree that paleo has been different from, say, like Atkins or something, I think is largely due to how effective we've been in the autoimmune story. Like, we are just crushing that scene, and there's a remarkable number of things that end up having autoimmune underpinnings that are generally labeled genetic diseases. So there appears to be a autoimmune component to Huntington's disease. There appears to be an autoimmune component to porphyria, which is a skin disorder, and so when you start really, even narcolepsy, I worked with a naval pilot who he got super sick in Afghanistan, developed narcolepsy, contacted me, and basically, so you imagine, narcolepsy, your blood pressure goes up, you get excited, and you fall asleep. So this guy's not doing a carrier landing.
Right.
He's not doing any type of landing ever again. And so he had like a month or 2 months to be able to get his stuff together, to be able to remain active duty and just be able to fly a plane ever again in his life. And I started doing a little searching around, and sure enough, narcolepsy has an autoimmune component to it. So we got him on an autoimmune paleo diet. He actually lived in like North Dakota, so we had him go to a tanning booth, like 2 to 3 minutes a day, 3 days a week. Got his vitamin D levels up from UV exposure, and all the symptomology went away, and he was cleared for flight. And he was like, "He's basically saved my career," you know. But it's reasonably easy to look for tissue transglutaminase related issues with any particular condition. And if we see that, then we can really start suspecting an autoimmune etiology. And then if that's the case, what the heck, let's give it a shot and see what happens. You know, we focus on sleep, restore the gut, get these pro-inflammatory foods out of the diet, make sure vitamin D levels go where they want, try to get the person interacting with the sun and get them out into the environment and move their body a little bit. But sleep, food, exercise, photo period, maybe it won't work. But if it does, we might have saved that person's life, because going on immunosuppressant drugs, that's a very high likelihood of all kinds of complications with that. Increased cancer rates, increased infectious disease rates. So there's all kinds of downsides to maintaining the standard of care.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so for the listeners out there who may be very new to this, can we just kind of define what is the paleo diet?
Sure. I mean, it's easiest describing it by exclusion. No grains, no legumes, no dairy. By an inclusive kind of story, we're looking at lean meat, seafood, some sort of a protein source that runs around and scurries typically. Lots of fruits and vegetables, root shoots, tubers, good fats, coconut oil, olive oil, and whatnot. You know, we're just really minimizing or removing what are classically defined as refined foods, typically grain, legume, dairy-based foods, and that can freak people out initially, because they're like, oh my, the same deal that I said when I was vegan. It's like, well, what do I eat if I don't eat that stuff? Well,
yeah.
There's quite a lot of things that you can eat, and also it doesn't mean that you're never, ever, ever necessarily going to be able to eat those foods again. But if you're sick, and this should make sense to people, if you are sick, you probably will require a dietary intervention that is more severe or strict than somebody that's not sick. But the goal is to get you healthy. And then for me and the folks that I work with, we try to figure out what latitude do we have then? How many what shenanigans can you get away with and not get sick again, not have a flare, and so that we're able to kick our heels up and have some fun. What I've found, is almost a universal, particularly if people have an autoimmune or a systemic inflammatory condition, gluten and gluten-containing items, wheat, rye, oats, barley, millet, soy sauce, like all these gluten-containing items seem to be really, really bad, and almost universally so. I see much more variance as to whether or not dairy or legumes or nightshades or some of these other potential autoimmune triggering foods, like they are issues, but it seems to be much more selective of an issue, whereas like the gluten seems to be virtually a universality. Like if somebody has an autoimmune disease, we have to start with the kind of the gluten-free part first and then start layering in other pieces later.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I would say, though, I mean, the statistics are that at least 50% of the people with a gluten issue have a dairy issue. And after my interview with Dr. Vogiani, who's the medical director of Cyrex and has done most of the, standard of care for these cross-reactivities of foods, he says that 100%, every time they do it, it's 100% with dairy. So I find that a lot of people actually can't sometimes feel the dairy, but when you actually do the blood testing on them, they're still reacting to it.
Inflammation, yeah.
Even after we fix the gut and stuff. So, I mean, who knows? Is it still a leaky gut, or, is it just truly that cross-reactivity? But I, absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you. And that's, the program that I have in my book is a 30-day program. Some people need to do that longer. But then once you get well, you can see, can you have that gluten-free cracker or that gluten-free pizza, once a month and not completely derail you. And some people can, and some people just can't.
Right. And I'm in the can't category as far as like ever getting gluten exposure.
Yeah, me either.
It's a non-starter. Whatever bathroom is within sprinting distance will be decommissioned, and it will need a priest and an exorcism and all kinds of stuff afterward. And I will feel really, really sick for, 2-3 weeks afterwards. Neurological symptoms, kind of weird, odd neurological symptoms, like a systemic numbness, GI problems. Like, it's really wacky how wide-ranging it is. And I think that, honestly, part of the difficulty of selling this idea to the more mainstream medical scene is that the paleo diet and gluten intolerance in particular ends up affecting so many different issues that it sounds like you're offering a panacea.
Right.
It's almost like if it was less effective or just effective in certain areas, that people would buy into it more. But it's like, well, it could be effective for that and that, everything from rheumatoid arthritis to narcolepsy. And if you're scientific and credulous at all, you're kind of like, come on, give me a break here. But, the reality is that we've found common mechanisms with all these stories. And then when we look at the outcome-based medicine, it's clearly working for people.
Yeah, and for some people, it is the panacea. I mean, I'm sure you have equally number of stories of people just, life-changing. For other people, they come in thinking it's going to be the panacea, and they don't feel anything when they get off of it. But I mean, I'm sure you've had, as I have, just hundreds of stories of it being the panacea for people. I mean, just incredibly life-changing. So how is the actual, within the paleo community, there's an autoimmune protocol within the paleo diet. And so how is that different than just the basic paleo diet?
So, basic paleo diet, we're saying, and again, by exclusion, no grains, no legumes, no dairy. Again, not making it a religion, but, depending on how sick the person is, we're going to get, a more stringent buy-in and whatnot. The autoimmune protocol, we start looking also at some other suspected gut irritants, nightshades, tomatoes, potatoes, eggplants. We even look at a variety of nuts and seeds, walnuts, almonds, cashews. All of these things still have some characteristics that are pretty similar to grains. They have some anti-nutrients and some protein-binding elements that can cause some problems. Those are the biggies. I'm
eggs.
Missing some stuff. Eggs are another biggie. And interestingly, an egg is essentially, it is the reproductive structure of, for that chicken. And interestingly, it has a lot of very similar characteristics to a grain or a bean. It has proteolytic enzymes. It has these antimicrobial kind of properties that end up making it both immunologically very irritating, but also difficult to digest. And so, again, from kind of a biological perspective, eggs look a heck of a lot like the reproductive or survival strategy of grains and legumes. And those are the biggies. You can even go a little bit deeper, and some people will end up peeling things like cucumbers and different fruits, because if there is an irritating element on a vegetable, it's going to be on the exterior. These are, and again, it's hard for people to think about this, but plants are full of actually toxic substances that dissuade critters from eating them.
Right.
And really, fruits have kind of a trade-off mechanism where, the tree will allow you to eat this fruit, but then that fruit seed is going to get deposited somewhere in a warm, a nutrient-rich environment, and it's going to grow another tree. And so there's some trade-off with that. But there are also some anti-predation chemicals inside the skins of different fruits and vegetables. So for some people, they will even get in pretty meticulously and peel things. So just to review, clearly no grains, no legumes, no dairy, but then the addition of nightshades, eggs, and then also potentially, skinning your fruits and vegetables. But that's a pretty far out there additional layer, but some people have found that necessary to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, do you feel like, it seems like this, would be a diet that would be good for everybody, even if you just don't have an autoimmune disease?
Yeah, Matt Lalonde has done some really interesting work where he looks at the nutrient density of eating, particularly the autoimmune protocol kind of paleo. And basically what he did is he did a PhD's worth of work in about 5 days. I don't know if he was on like massive amounts of cocaine during this time or what. But
probably just some bulletproof coffee.
Probably something like that, yeah. And he basically took every food that was in the USDA nutrient database, which was several thousand foods, plopped it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then standardized these things for, say, like 100 calories of that food, and the vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that you receive from that food. And basically what he came out with was that lean meats, seafood, fruits, vegetables, root shoots, and tubers are the most nutrient-dense foods you can eat. And then when you add dairy, when you add grains, when you add legumes, it increases the caloric content, but decreases the vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. So when, and this is one of the kind of gotchas when I'm interacting with kind of a classically trained dietitian, if we're kind of jousting back and forth about this stuff, and then I say, well, you do feel that we should eat as nutrient dense a diet as we can, right? And they say, yeah, of course. Then I kind of slide them this pre-planned diet across the table, and I say, if you can make a more nutrient dense diet with the inclusion of grains, legumes, and dairy, I'll pay you $5,000. And they can't do it. It's impossible. So,
wow.
that's a really fascinating piece to this, that this paleo diet, and particularly with a little bit of an orientation towards the autoimmune protocol, is the most nutrient dense way that you could possibly eat.
And what's your take on organ meats? Because I know...
Love organ meats. I mean, the only organ meat I can't eat is a kidney. I've tried and tried to make kidney work, but I can't make that one work. But liver, heart is. I actually I've lived with a Cambodian family for a period of time, and they make kind of a traditional soup that's like the Vietnamese pho, where you use like the stomach and the intestines and everything in that. So I try to use as much of that stuff as I can, both from a health standpoint, but also the whole snout to tail, eat the whole animal kind of thing. Like, there are sustainability and kind of ethics issues around, the eating of animals. And to me, supporting the sustainability piece is trying to get my stuff pastured and grass-fed and sustainable on that side. And then also just, send me the whole cow and I'm going to eat the whole damn cow. And I figure out a way to do it, other than the kidneys. The kidneys, I let them keep that. But other than that, I take everything, the shanks, the bones. I make bone broth out of all that stuff, use that as the base for our soup stocks. Even if we, occasionally I'll make some white rice, and I use that as the base for the white rice. I don't really seem to react to rice all that much, so I make that every once in a while, and Zoe definitely likes it, so we give that a shot. But I try to use the whole critter, all the organs. People can't handle stuff like liver. Something that I've been doing is taking a 1/4 pound of liver, 1 pound of hamburger, dicing up the liver super fine, and you maybe even pump it through a food processor, mixing it with that 1 pound of hamburger, and then cooking, basically hamburgers out of that, or use it for chili or soups or stews or whatever you do. And that's a really easy way to include some liver into your diet.
That's a good idea, because I've had a hard time, just mentally. I went to the store and, went to go get some liver, and literally it was like a slice of liver. I mean, being a doctor, like, I remember looking at the liver and pathology. I'm like, okay, I mean, this is, I thought they might kind of dice it up or hand you a little piece. It's literally like a horizontal cut, a cross section. Yeah, I couldn't think of the word, a cross section of a liver. So I've got it in January, because I was like, oh, I'm going to do this, January, I'm going to start my New Year's resolution, do the liver. It's still sitting in the freezer. I was just like, I just can't see cutting that up.
Next time we get to Texas, I'll make you some Sloppy Joe mix out of that stuff.
All right.
You'll be good to go. And it's funny, we really acculturate to the food that we ate as kids, and we tend to eat further on. Like, Zoe will crush liver at this point, because I've been cooking it for her since she started eating solid food. And like, she has no problems with that. She eats kimchi, she eats raw, sauerkraut that I make at home. So it's interesting. People are shocked by the variety of food that she eats, but that's what we put in front of her, and we just didn't. I know I'm getting a little off track.
No, I actually wanted to get into that, about the family, about how, making the whole family paleo. You have 2 very small children, a newborn, so.
Yeah, people assume that kids have to have like sweet, sugary, hyper palatable food for them to eat. They will eat anything you put in front of them, particularly when they get hungry, and clearly she does have preferences, and we have, we've tried to find some balance. Like, we've never consciously given her a gluten exposure. So if we do like a birthday cake or a cupcake or something that's gluten-free, but I tell you what, it's like crack for her. Once when she had her first cookie, man, she 6 months later, she's like, cookie, and like that drilled into her psyche. She really liked that. So it's something for people to just keep in mind. And again, like the kid topic gets really dodgy. People lose their minds when you start talking about kids. People get very provincial about it. But I mentioned the hyper palatability of food, just in that, if you give certain things to your kids and your kids want them incessantly, just don't be surprised by that, you know. And flip side of that is that if you cook, not necessarily bland, but they don't have to be over the top, you know, crazy meals, your kids will also develop a really good palate for just simple food, and they'll appreciate it. You know, when we do some baked sweet potatoes and I just brush them with some olive oil, put a little bit of garlic, salt, and pepper on them and bake them in the oven, Zoe just smashes that stuff. So it doesn't have to be really complex for the kids to really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about you kind of determined your taste buds early on. I mean, as a child, my parents were kind of hippies. My mother made homemade yogurt, homemade whole wheat bread. We never had white flour, white rice in the house. I mean, I never ate white rice. I became a vegetarian at 14, but there was a lot of tofu and broccoli. And because I had grown up on that stuff, and if I ate a cookie, it was an oatmeal cookie or a molasses cookie. It wasn't a Toll House chocolate chip cookie. Right. There was no peanut butter. Was literally going to the Whole Foods store and grinding the peanuts. Like I literally never had Jif. And then when I did, you know, got off to college and my friends are eating Jif and stuff like that, I'm like tasting like, that is gross. You know, that just tastes so fake. And I would go over to the Whole Foods store and get my ground peanuts. So I completely agree with you, but I don't want to skip over it being a family affair. I mean, my program, we call it the Myers Way because, you know, typically it's a woman with autoimmunity coming to see me, but, you know, and if her mom had lupus and her aunt has Hashimoto's and she's there with Hashimoto's and she has 2 girls in the house, it's like, what do you think's coming down the pike if you don't kind of get a hold of this? And particularly, you know, having a newborn, because it's a little bit harder when you have somebody who's 4, 5, 6, 7, and they're used to the cookies and the, you know, mac and cheese for dinner and the waffle for breakfast to get them paleo. But if you are starting out at a very young age or a newborn, it is much easier to do that. So, I mean, can we just talk a little bit about how you've done that as a family for those who are interested out there?
Sure. You know, and it's interesting, like maybe 10 years ago, if I had had a kid, I would have probably been so over the top nutty that I think that people, no matter what, just the fact that we eat paleo, there are going to be some people who are going to say, kids can have eating disorders. Like there's going to be all kinds of problems. And I really don't think that that's the case. 10 years ago, that might have been the case because I was so almost religiously fervent about this stuff that, you know, I wouldn't have introduced dark chocolate or, you know, gluten-free pancakes or anything like that. And so, you know, 90% of the meals that we eat are paleo. You know, it's sweet potatoes and broccoli and grass-fed beef and some pastured chicken and stuff like that. Occasionally, maybe once a week, we have some gluten-free pancakes for breakfast, and Zoe really likes them. But, you know, it's interesting. We use a real maple syrup, which, you know, just a little bit of that goes a long way. And it's really interesting. Zoe really likes 90% dark chocolate. I tried giving her some 50% dark chocolate, and she spit it out. She's like, "Dad, that's not good. You know, it was too sweet." And even the cookies that we make at home, to me, they taste great, but they're mildly sweet. They're not over the top sweet. And we've had some friends make some gluten-free, baked goods, and then there's a gluten-free bakery here in Reno. And I think that when people hear gluten-free, they assume, well, I need to triple the amount of sugar to add to it.
So crazy. It's like you're missing the wheat, so let's, double the sugar to make up for it.
You have to double the sugar. It's like, no, you don't, man. You made this thing horrible. And, Zoe won't eat the super sugary stuff. I'm sure that I could get her acculturated up to that. But we make some almond flour cookies. We make some just gluten-free cookies that have some brown rice flour and stuff like that. And she seems to do fine with all that. Really, I've just tried to keep her gluten-free. And most of the time, we're paleo. But then we do some whatever's in the Pamela's bake mix, brown rice and tapioca and all that. And she seems to do fine. And I've noticed too, one of the places that we go out to eat, I can't eat their bacon because where they cook the bacon is on a grill that gets some gluten contamination. It's just doubled me over in the past. Zoe really likes bacon, and so I was kind of like, well, we'll have her try it. And she seems to have no GI issues with that. But, this is some of the, even though I know she's getting a low level of gluten exposure, I know that biologically there's a trade-off with that where some degree of gluten exposure can actually tune the immune system to be less reactive to it.
Right.
And but this is a crazy thing for me because I'm like, oh, she needs to be 100%,
right.
gluten avoidance. But that's been some of the stuff that I've had to do some real internal dialogue with, where I know she's getting a low-level gluten exposure. She doesn't complain about her stomach hurting. She doesn't seem to have any GI symptoms. But you and I both know that you don't always have GI symptoms.
Right.
But I'm not giving her a piece of toast. But I know that there's a little bit of cross-contamination on that bacon. So that's kind of where I've tried to find some balance with that stuff and not be a complete nutcase.
Yeah.
So we do a little bit of gluten-free, baked goods. We do some dark chocolate. Interestingly, she won't eat dark chocolate that's below like 80 or 85% dark chocolate because it's so sweet that she's like, Dad, I don't like it. And she just won't eat it. So that's interesting to me. And I know at some point she's going to be over to a friend's house and she's going to end up eating a regular gluten-filled cupcake, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully she's non-reactive to it. Hopefully we build this healthy gut and everything, and she's non-reactive, and hopefully she's able to navigate that stuff as she becomes an adult and, goes on. But I'm just trying to give the best basis that I can for her, and the whole family eats this way, so it's not like there's anything weird or special for one person versus the other.
Right, which can also, that's a whole different kind of dynamic. That's what I also tell my patients,
right.
Like, particularly if it's the child that's coming in that's seeing me, it's like, just, you got to make all the kids in the family same diet, or else there's going to be major problems down the line.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
So let's circle back about, you had mentioned kind of the environmental impact when you were eating meat. And so for those people out there that are, if they haven't already turned off the podcast, who are vegetarian or vegan, you were a vegan. I was a vegetarian for 27 years, and here we are today. So, those people that are maybe knowing that they have autoimmunity, they are a vegetarian or a vegan.
I would really encourage people to check out what Joel Salatin does at Polyface Farms. I would really
Polyface Farms?
Polyface Farms.
Okay.
Biodynamic, food production, and he raises goats and chickens and cows and rabbits and also a lot of fruits and vegetables, and it's done in a closed-loop biodynamic fashion. Alan Savory of the Savory Institute has developed a process of what he calls holistic animal management that has reversed desertification in Africa, Central America, Mexico, and it's really amazing. And if you start getting concerned about carbon footprint, carbon sequestration, and whatnot, one of the biggest issues that we've faced is that there's 2/3 of the land masses in the United States, Europe, Eurasia that are completely inappropriate for raising food, but they are completely appropriate for large grazing animals and an interactive kind of biodynamic ecology that's based around grazing animals and grasslands. Those grasslands at one time had topsoil that was tens of meters deep, like 100 feet deep. Now that topsoil is almost down to bare ground. We've denuded it and destroyed it through row crop farming on these locations. And so what Savory has shown is that we can reverse desertification by using actually large grazing animals. And there's an almost infinite potential for carbon sequestration. The animals eat grass, they poop. The poop creates an environment in which carbon and nitrogen fixing bacteria live. That's where topsoil is developed. That topsoil can literally be almost infinitely deep. Like there's really no limit to the amount of topsoil that we can produce. When you produce topsoil, you're sequestering carbon. So I work with the Savory Institute. I'm one of the consultants for those folks. There are some really interesting people in very, very large businesses that are looking what Alan Savory is doing, and they think that what he is doing is spot on, and they're willing to put a lot of money into what he is up to because they are on the side of the carbon production story that is very, very prominent. And that's about all I can say due to non-disclosure agreements. But it's really, really interesting. And so I'm
sort of just like thinking about the gut and how, all, at least in our world, all this research and information is going into like rebuilding the gut and the gut biome and fixing the gut. And now maybe it will go into, the environment and, just as you're doing that, I was thinking, wow, it sounds like, going in and replenish. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the identical story. Our grasslands and our soil is, when you look at the nutrient interface and the energy interface and all that type of stuff, it is identical in the way that it works with the gut and the need to restore the diversity it's a perfect analogy.
So we're just going to wait till we destroy it all and then have to go back and rebuild it. I was in the Peace Corps in Paraguay, and somebody sent me this article just about what Cargill is doing in the Chaco in Paraguay. And it's sickening, just because Paraguay is so not on anybody's radar that it's just happening, and nobody, looking at the aerial photos of, the rainforest to, just in the last 10 years, what has happened. I mean, it's really sad. So go in and destroy it with, corn, and the article was about the corn and soy crops really that they're planting there. So destroying all this, I think it was one of the most biological diverse, the Chaco regions, like in the entire world, and just being destroyed to plant soy.
Right. And that's something that, ironically, if you are vegetarian, vegan, you can't really support the row crop story. You just can't do it. From a sustainability piece, you got to look more at yams, sweet potatoes, taro, these non-row crop entities. And it's ironic, that again, kind of maybe one of the skinny end of the wedges to get soy as popular as it is has been the vegetarian movement.
Right.
So, and when you look at the environmental damage that particularly corn and soy produce, it's pretty shocking. So that's an interesting thing. And there's a professor at the University of Oregon that did a paper comparing the number of animals killed in the production of food via row crops versus if we had like these large grazing animals that ate grass and we produced the bulk of our carbohydrate needs from fruits, vegetables, and tree nuts. He made the argument that you would actually have less suffering and fewer animals killed with this kind of paleo-looking approach versus the row crop approach.
Yeah.
And so there's a real battle going on, in the kind of political and ideological scene, saying that meat production is going to destroy the planet. And I would actually argue that trying to turn the planet into the planet of vegans is going to destroy the planet. We need some sort of a biodynamic experience that is both plants and animals. And, I won't go too nuts on this, but if people could focus on the removal of farm subsidies, a huge chunk of this story goes away, because we are currently allocating massive amounts of resources into producing food that is unhealthy both for the planet in the way that it's produced, but it's also unhealthy for us. If we open this up to the market, maybe we eat meat once a week, maybe we eat it 3 times a day, I don't know, but the market will kind of determine that. Currently, the government is determining the amounts and types of food that we eat via farm subsidies. Yeah. And I think that that's a horrible problem. And that's as far as...
Well, you and I feel the same way about all that. So, yeah. Okay, so for the vegans or vegetarians listening, you were one, I was one. How, any advice if they do want to start maybe changing the diet? Big toe in first, dive full force?
I dove in full force, and I don't know if it's because I had eaten meat previously and I enjoyed meat. I enjoyed eating vegan too. Like, I became very good at cooking that. It wasn't like a lack of taste or palatability. So I enjoyed both ways of eating, enjoyed foods out of kind of both houses. The first meal that I had, coming back to meat eating, was a rack of ribs that I got from Whole Foods that I baked in the oven and ate it with a salad. And my digestion had been horrible up until that point. And the digestion after that meal was the best that I had had in a couple of years. So I had no issues with it. I know some people psychologically, they get kind of freaked out about the idea of consuming meat. I know some people end up in a state of hypochlorhydria, low stomach acid, and so they may legitimately, have some aversion to consuming meat. So I'm a little bit of the jump in with both feet and just kind of give it a go. But clearly you can sneak up on it. You could try some fish or eggs or something like that. It seems a little more benign, a little bit easier to wrap your head around. I mean, I'm a little bit of an extreme personality, though. So kind of,
really?
I'm not much of a hand holder, so I'm really a horrible person on the behavior change side of things. I'm not very complex on that. I'm kind of a do or don't do it, and I'm moving on. And part of that is because, about a third of my work week is spent trying to match people who have autoimmune disease, cancer, and other systemic inflammatory diseases that are killing them, trying to match people with doctors like you who know what they're doing. And we don't have very many Amy Meyers out in the world.
Yeah.
And so I spend a ton of time trying to help people that are at their wits' end. And so I don't end up spending a ton of time on the behavior modification thing. I'm very much like a high velocity, low drag kind of thing. The people that are willing to jump in, and it's like, okay, you're on the boat, and the rest of you guys are left behind. So, which is not the right way to do it, but that's the way I have to do it because the amount of people that I'm trying to help.
But you do have nutritionists that do consultations and stuff for you. I mean, I'm the same way. The sick person, they've flown in to see me. I'm just like, it needs to be this, 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 and this. And then they go meet with Brianne, my nutritionist. She's like, okay, let's exhale. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. Let me walk you through it,
Yeah.
But I didn't need hand holding when I did it. Actually, I hadn't really known. I think when I started eating meat, I didn't really know so much about paleo. I was still eating grains. It just, for me, there were so many things that I wasn't able to eat, the gluten, the dairy, and after being a vegetarian, that somebody did suggest to me to give up grains. They weren't really calling it paleo. I was like, well, then what am I going to eat? So I actually never liked hamburgers or liked biting into meat. So I had given it up because I didn't like the texture. So I made like taco meat, just ground hamburger meat. And I too was afraid. I mean, I hadn't eaten red meat in 27 years. I mean, I thought I'm going to be sick as a dog. This is not going to go over well. And, I ate it. And the next day I was like, where's more? Where is more? And my stepmother, in support, my father went through my program. He has autoimmune and is now off his medications for that. And my stepmother had been a vegetarian for 35 years, and she went paleo in order to support him. So, she called me saying, oh my God, am I going to be sick the next day? What am I going to expect? And, same thing. She just ate it and has been totally fine. So, to those people out there who are nervous, you can go slowly, you can dive in. Some people may legitimately, as you said, there are certain enzymes and stomach acid that needs to happen to break down meat. And if you haven't been eating it, those might have gone away and you might need some support.
So definitely the sleep quality and photo period is an often underestimated piece of autoimmunity. But if you don't sleep well, you don't heal and recover. And that's just a fundamental piece. And so I do a lot of work with police, military, and fire personnel. And these folks, due to the nature of their work, cannot sleep consistently. And the problems that we see in these people are monumental. And it's very, very difficult to deal with. And we see these same issues in the general population. We just see it in a very accelerated fashion with police, military, and fire.
And probably medical personnel.
Medical personnel too. Yeah.
I definitely had some resetting to do. Okay, so that's going to be your one big take-home point, which is a huge one, right? Is getting good quality sleep and good quality sunlight to reset those circadian rhythms and help your body to heal.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. So how can people find you, Robb?
RobbWolf.com, or, it's depending on what town you're in. I may be on the side of the street panhandling or something. So, but typically, RobbWolf.com is where you can track me down. That's where the blog, podcast, and all those shenanigans live currently. So that's where I'm at.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Robb. I really appreciate it.
Huge honor to be on the show. Thanks, Doc.